So I would start with the questions. We have a lot of English questions. I don't know whether the interpreters had the opportunity to translate the questions. Shall I wait or?
But if you have them in English, they can translate them if you can read them out.
No, but they can send me a message.
I think you can start.
Or not. So I will start with the questions.
With what you can read already.
Yes. So the first one is from Maria Cristina Gaggiani, and the question is the following: did the researchers have the impression that from the institutions or the public opinion viewpoint, the interpreter-mediated hearing is perceived as more indispensable in legal settings related to international issues, such as asylum proceedings, rather than within domestic, civil, or criminal proceedings? I would give the floor to our lawyer, to Stefan, who could answer this question.
Yes, I think it's a very, very pertinent question, actually, because when you think about it at face value, of course, in asylum proceedings, where the languages are more exotic, so to speak, it seems reasonable or easier to understand that you need an interpreter, as opposed to criminal proceedings where sometimes the lawyer in question maybe speaks the language of the suspect, victim, witness to a certain extent, feels the need less to bring on board an interpreter. So I think at face value, I would say, yes, it seems to be the rule or the norm rather than the exception in asylum proceedings, where for criminal proceedings, it's an exception, really. And if you ask, I would say, lawyers, mostly, none of them are all convinced of the need for an interpreter. But then, if I'm reflecting on this question a bit, and I refer back to my presentation earlier, I think that the safeguards that are in place for criminal proceedings related to the right to an interpreter are better developed. I mean, they talk about the quality, for example. They talk about a mechanism to complain. They talk about language and an interpreter in relation to a fair process and a fair proceeding. While in a Belgian context, for an asylum proceeding, there is no quality control of interpreting. And if you then appeal and you go to the judge and you complain about, let's say, quality of interpreting having had an impact on your case, they will always respond that it's a hypothetical issue because they can't backtrack what has been interpreted or not. It's not recorded. So the only thing that counts is what the interviewer writes down on his paper, and afterwards you have the chance to complain about it. As I explained, you have the chance to complain about what's being written down. But when that's done, it's done. There's no way back. So in that regard, I think, as I said, while it's the norm for asylum, I think the guarantees are way lower in that context. But definitely requires some more reflection. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much for your answer, Stefan. And Maria Cristina has a second question. Have you detected any gender preferences in children between male-female interpreter? Who wants to answer this question?
Maybe I can shortly. We didn't ask the children, so we can't really answer this question. Start my video. Yes, I start my video. Sorry. So we can't honestly ask this question from the children's point of view, but we do know that I forgot to mention that at least in Belgium, maybe Italy, Amalia or Gabi should also answer this question. We didn't ask about it. We had also 8 male minors, so no female, but we know there were female interpreters, and they didn't have any comments on it, but we didn't ask. So maybe Italy has some more information on that.
Gabi or Amalia, would you answer?
Yes, when we during Co-Minor 2, when we organized the interviews with Italian children, we asked that question to the 10 to 14 and 14 to 17 age groups, and they had no preference in terms of gender. Only one teenager said he would have preferred a female interpreter rather than a male interpreter, but that was just 1 out of 18. They had preference. They had different views about age. That was another issue. Some said, that an older interpreter means more experience, and maybe so it can be more trusted. And others said an older interpreter is more intimidating because there's the age gap and you feel more judged, whereas a younger interpreter makes you feel more at ease. But they were split into these 2 different opinions, so nothing general.
Thank you, Amalia. But we have also another answer from the legal point of view. Stefan?
Yes, if I may, just quickly, because there's a directive on the safeguards in asylum proceedings, and the directive at least states in Article 15 that wherever possible, member states shall provide an interpreter of the same sex if the applicant so requests, unless the authority has reasons to believe that such a request is based on grounds which are not related to difficulties on the part of the applicant to present the grounds of his or her application. So if a person wants that, they can ask for it.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan.
So perhaps I might add one thing. We didn't go in these aspects, but one thing I could think of where it is extremely important to choose the interpreter also according to gender might be situations where there is violence or something like that, sexual violence involved, where obviously, especially with young people, with minors, this aspect of talking about such private and terrible things, perhaps for a young woman to a man or through a man, could be more difficult. But this is also a thing to think of, not only in choosing the interpreter, but also perhaps in choosing the gender of the police woman or other people who have to interact with that young person. But we didn't go into these specificities in our interviews, in our research.
Mm-hmm. If I may add something, I know from our police officer with whom we work regularly and who trains our legal interpreters on how to interview children or how to interpret in an interpreter-mediated questioning of minors. He says it doesn't matter which gender the interpreter or the police officer has. So it's a Belgian way of interviewing, maybe. But I would like to move on and to the next question from Ksenia Yakovleva. Non-professional interpreters are known to sometimes overstep their role as interpreters and intervene in the conversation. For example, giving advice to the person, especially in asylum proceedings. a minor may not be aware of the specific roles and get intimidated by what the interpreter is saying and follow his advice. How can this be prevented? How can children be prepared for an interpreter-mediated interview? And how can the different roles be explained to them? So these are different questions. I don't know who would like to ask, who would like to answer this question.
I might try.
Yes.
From the viewpoint of the interpreter, as I mentioned, sorry, I have to start my video. I get scolded by the system whenever I forget. Okay, as I said, when I spoke in my head as an interpreter, you can establish the rules of the game during a briefing. There is where you agree with other professionals that you start the meeting with the child, telling the child who is doing what, because from the interviews we had with the Italian children, not the interviews we presented today, it became very, very clear that one of the main requirements for children is not to be nervous about what's going on. And in order not to be nervous, they have to know what is that interview, who is doing what. So I think that this is again a joint effort that has to be made in teamwork to make sure that the child is not too afraid or too intimidated. And about unskilled, unprofessional interpreters, what can we do? We can just keep insisting that professional interpreters should be used, because the negative consequences of untrained people can be very, very serious. And there's a lot of literature now about that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Amalia. I think that Heidi will answer this question.
Yeah, no, just Amalia already answered it, but I just want to add that we hope that children can be empowered now through our website, because as you will see tomorrow, there is a lot of materials for the children, child-friendly materials that explain which are their rights and what is the interpreter doing, what is his or her role. So we hope that children find also their way to our website to prevent them from non-professional interpreters, of course. And of course, it's our responsibility to avoid non-professional interpreters, to not hire them, to not work with them. But I mean, and with non-professional, I mean ad hoc interpreters. I don't mean the people who try to solve problems when the need is there. I mean people who are really not trained but still think to be able to do a job as a fully fledged interpreter. That's something we should definitely avoid. So, but take a look at or follow tomorrow our conference to see what child-friendly materials are there on our website. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
May I add something?
Yes.
I think what we have seen is that the children have a lot of burden in these very first moments when they really need interpreters. So I think it would be rather difficult to put also this burden on their shoulders, telling them, well, be aware that there are interpreters who can maybe are not so good in doing or do things which they should not do. I think, as we are talking also on human rights, and we have heard in the beginning that being heard and being allowed to speak is a human right of children. If this right is to be granted by institutions, institutions should be the ones who are responsible for granting that, and for granting that no unqualified people can act as interpreters only because it's difficult, and oh, there are the languages, and these are rare languages, oh, and they cost so much, and so on. Definitely this is, if there is an obligation to allow, to grant that right, it can't be only to say to the children, oh, look, you must be careful of that, and you should know that. The quality of interpreting offered is definitely, in my opinion at least, a responsibility of institutions.
Okay, thank you, Gabi. And Ksenia has another question. Do you also look into the topic of children becoming interpreters for the parents because they learn the language more quickly?
Maybe I can answer this one, and I can be very short. No, we didn't look into that, because that's a completely different research field. Also, that's child brokering. So there are so many, not many, but there are quite a few interesting studies on child brokering. But that is definitely not what we did in this research. So that's our short answer.
Thank you very much. The next question is.
Can I just add one point, one legal point? There's an article in one of the directives for granting safeguards in proceedings that says that children should not interpret in legal proceedings. It's clearly stated.
Okay, but we have to move on now because we have only 6 minutes and 3 or 4 other questions, so I'm sorry. Then Nicola Fischer asks, if all the minors would have preferred not to need an interpreter but needed one, did you register anything that interpreters or officials can do to make minors accept this inevitability? Who will answer this difficult question?
I can try and start, but it's a very good question and a very complex one. How can we make minors accept this inevitability? Yes, we saw that from the moment it's the keyword that is coming up here is trust. So from the moment they feel they can trust the interpreter and they link it to linguistic skills, to impartiality, to kind behavior, empathic behavior, they link it to no swings no swings being anger and things like that, as we showed you in their answers. I think that it is a crucial point. The trust that naturally comes up when they initially they don't want an interpreter, but they need him, and if he's there and they feel they can trust him according to the list of qualities I presented to you, I think they accept it, and even they are of course very grateful, because they realize that's the only person that can empower them and can transfer to them the information they need. And
may I step in? This made come to my mind the concept of standby interpreter. I think Monteoliva wrote about that in her work recently. And that's one thing we learned also in our research. We should have foreseen the interpreter on standby. If we don't need them in the end, fine, everybody's happy. But as soon as I understand that child doesn't speak enough of his English, or that little girl doesn't speak enough Italian to tell me the things she could tell me, she would like to tell me, if I had had an interpreter on standby, he or she could have stepped in. And especially in legal situations, because ours were not legal situations, remember that. It was an informal interview talking to these young people. the more so in a legal situation, a judge or a policeman should never accept a child saying, well, I understand, yes, I can say it, I can follow, and I try to make myself understood. That is not enough to grant a right, I fear. And again, institutions should not allow that. Even if it's cheaper, even if it's easier, even if you don't have to reschedule the meeting, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Gabi. The next question is from Finn Andries. Is there any information about the training and or certification of the interpreters the children in Belgium have had contact with? Mainly professional interpreters, cultural mediators, or untrained mediators? Were it mostly professional certified interpreters the children preferred, as they mainly trusted the mediators who had a better language proficiency and took notes?
I think I can answer this question because it was in my presentation. Thank you very much for this question, Fien, because actually I went on the slide very quickly on the drawbacks of some drawbacks in our research and in our interviews. And one drawback was that we definitely we worked only with professional interpreters, meaning legal interpreters that were sometimes specialized in working with minors, but actually only legal interpreters, except one, because the Guardian and the Asylum Center told us that they were used to work with one interpreter, and we stupidly accepted it as a condition to do the interview. And then we noticed, I remember very well, I did the interview with Stefan, that the interpreter was not a professional at all. So that was one of the drawbacks. So we definitely, as was told before by Gabi, etc., we as responsibles should definitely insist on a professional interpreter, which we had. So in 7 cases of 8, we had a professional interpreter. So yeah, and yeah, even working with professional. When we were working with professional interpreters with the interviews, we noticed in their answers that they were not always happy with their interpreter, as I told you this afternoon during the presentation. So yeah, we don't have a clear idea when they worked with professional interpreters or not. We were working in the interviews with professional interpreters, except for one interview, but during their asylum proceedings, etc., we don't know. We can only trust their judgment, and as I explained, their judgment is quite good. They are clever in detecting who is professional and who is not. Mm-hmm. I hope that answers. Yeah.
Can I ask now the interpreters whether I can pose 3 other questions? So it will take 6-7 minutes more time. Could you put it in the chat whether it is okay for you? No one reacts? So our interpreters, okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your flexibility. Thank you. So the next question is from Olga Ziori. Thank you very much for the useful presentations. I would like to point out that for many interpreters working with unaccompanied minors, the difference between the role of the interpreter and the role of the intercultural mediator is not always understood. Could you point out some of the most important differences? Is it acceptable when during a legal meeting an interpreter pauses the interpretation in order to make a comment? Thank you in advance.
Yeah, I've answered to this question already privately to this person, and I've said that
Okay.
I have to start my video, otherwise the computer is protesting. Well, I've already answered in the chat privately. The intercultural mediator in Italy is a profile which is very similar to a caseworker in the UK, meaning that usually the cultural mediators follow the newly arrived migrant through different stages and steps. I mean, they may be interpreters at the police station, but also in hospital when they look for accommodation and so on. So they follow closely one or more migrants, and oftentimes they are also full-time staff members of reception centers. I'm talking about migration settings. So this is a difference. And also in training, they are more trained about the Italian healthcare or legal system than in interpreting techniques or in communication mechanisms. So this is the main difference. And also about comments during an interview. As I was saying when I mentioned, the agreeing on the rules of the game, yes, if there's something going wrong, if there's a critical incident, you may have a sort of space or little time for meta communication with the other professionals to solve the issue. But comments about the child or the case should not be made by the interpreter. Yes, comments on something that concerns communication or something is going wrong with interpreting, then you can discuss that, definitely. But I know that professionals tend to ask the interpreter's opinion about the child or the case, and I think we should refrain from giving that.
Okay, thank you very much. We will a bit speed up. The remark and question from Tesfa Jesus Sira. Theoretically, I agree with everything what all of you say, but practically, there are some difficulties. For instance, sometimes the officer, the police officer, or the interviewer, or whoever is suspicious of the interpreter. She thinks that the interpreter is helping the minor, and because of this, the interpreter has to be very careful about himself and very stressed to save himself rather than to be relaxed and help both parties. What should be done in such a situation? So, who would answer this question?
Well, I try. In the situation when you are already in, it's quite difficult what to do. The larger answer would be have a briefing in advance. Try to make sure that you are more or less doing the same thing. You're on the same boat. You're understanding. There is an understanding on the basicals, and even going to a higher step, interprofessional training.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think also this is the key word, interprofessional training.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that indeed there should not be suspicion or no trust among the professionals themselves, because that will reflect on the minor, and he or she will feel that too. So I confirm what Gabi was saying. Briefing and interprofessional training is so rewarding, as we saw in the previous projects. Thank you.
And then the last question, from Chiara Cantone, wouldn't it be easier for the kids talking directly with a judge who have been previously trained to be also as an interpreter? For example, a judge specialized in 2/3 languages and then obviously work only with kids who speak those languages.
I think, yeah, this is a very, but this is really the ideal world. This would be really wonderful if doctors and judges and lawyers and psychologists all spoke 5 languages, and then happen to speak also Pashto and things and other exotic languages. So that would be the ideal world, clearly. But I'm afraid that is not. It's difficult to realize. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you so much. These were the questions. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Brussels time, Budapest time, Bologna time, sharp at 9 o'clock, we will see you again, and then we will continue. We have some very, very interesting material to share with you. So please come back and see you tomorrow. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.